She's gone. She's gone. its presence, its spirit, and the soul inside you. Conscious, transcendence thoughts, seat of consciousness, power. This is the religion of the modern world. Scientific view of nature. Synchronicity. Consciousness as operational effect. Cause and effect. Nothingness. The absolute truth. Yes. All right. Thank you very much. That is a new Boards of Canada. I know nobody out there gives a shit. Um, but Boards of Canada has released new music after 13 years. 2013, they last released an LP. We were still buying. I was still buying CDs back then. I bought the CD. Um, it's actually my least favorite. They don't do bad music. Nothing they've done is bad. But Tomorrow's Harvest was actually my least favorite Boards of Canada LP. There were like 4 main LPs, and then there's a whole bunch of music out there, EPs and bootlegs and stuff. But album releases through Warp Records or whoever they used. There were 4, and there was Music Has the Right to Children, Gio Gotti, which may be the best record ever made. And then my personal favorite, the Campfire Head Phase, and then a long wait, and out came Tomorrow's Harvest, which to me, like I said, is my least favorite. I never find myself going back. Occasionally, I go back to Gio Gotti or any of those 3 records, those 3 awesome records. Occasionally, I go back. I mean, there are songs from those records in my playlist right now. But Tomorrow's Harvest, I never revisit it. Never. So there are a lot of kids out there. They discovered BOC for the first time through Tomorrow's Harvest, and that's the big one for them. They just don't know. They don't know any better. But anyway, this new music sounds incredible. Boards of Canada has a YouTube channel where they just put out stuff. And recently they have released 2, maybe 3 little videos like the one I just showed you, suggesting that a record is coming out, and everybody's all excited. Everybody in the BOC community is so excited. Yeah, I don't know if I'm excited, but I'm paying attention. All right, I wanted to talk about a little bit because I think it's over now. I think it might be now over, but there was, of course, Nick Fuentes having a dust up with sort of what I think of as the flaky faction in this. I don't know. It's not the dissident right. It's the far right. It's the anti-Semitic right, certainly. I don't know what to call it. Any term you give it, it eventually becomes a term of derision. So I mean, I don't even. And I've decided I don't take sides uh, because I'm not the guy, right? But there needs to be a movement, and it needs to be, frankly, anti-Jewish influence, not anti-Semitic. I say anti-Semitic in the same way I describe myself as racist. And of course, dummies will never understand what I mean. Dummies who agree with me, dummies who don't agree with me aren't going to understand what I mean. And what I mean is, I don't hate other races as a racist. I'm accepting the conventional. And that's something I've always been a proponent of. If there is some great conventional term like racist, anti Semite, and as we all know here, because we're smarter than everybody else, these notions are kind of ridiculous. They're kind of fabulist, right? They're bullshit. The idea of racism is kind of bullshit. It's not a real thing. Likewise, the idea of anti Semitism is not a real thing. And beyond that, so you don't need to actually hate black people or Jews. I say black people, other races, or Jews to be respectively racist or anti Semitic, by their definitions. They will call it hate, right? Just recognize differences and they'll call it hate. Or just notice things about Jewish power and they'll call you an anti Semite. But beyond that, of course, you're also allowed to hate. I don't feel hate per se. I'm too soft for that, frankly. I'm too inherently liberal, frankly. All my hard right beliefs are direct entirely from the head, right? They don't come from the heart. There's never been this. And I'm still a little cringed out when I witness it in other white people, this sort of reflexive, reactive racism, for lack of a better word, where you know, they, you know, let's leave aside black people and say Pajites and Jews, who are, as a group, are clearly obnoxious enough to warrant, this disdain. But I just think of the white guy who just actually, back in the day, back before we were all involved in all this nonsense, post civil rights nonsense, the guy who really did just have an intolerant temperament and just was not able to understand, much less appreciate, that different people are different, and that, the kind of person who nowadays, insists on being more racist than you, right? Perhaps that's a different category in itself. But, the guy who wants to talk about Filipinos like they're really awful, or Asians, East Asians, like they're just awful too. They're just terrible people too. And I'm not saying there aren't bad things about these groups, but you get a little ridiculous. It's pretty obvious the complaints you have with black people, the complaints we have with Jews, right? It's pretty fucking obvious, when these groups are, malicious as groups and perhaps as individuals more malicious, you know. That's pretty obvious. But you start getting out to people like Filipinos. I love Filipinos. You know, they have their problems. They're not perfect. They probably go home and talk mad shit about us. I'm sure they do. But you know, it's just you try to start acting like, oh yeah. I mean, I have a hard time even feeling that way against Mexicans, right? And there's some people, like you said, they want. There are those people who've made a conscious decision that they're going to outdo you in racism, and they're kind of like these would be the woke right. If woke right had any validity, you know, if the idea that there's a right that's basically the same as the woke left, it would be those guys who just constantly trying to outdo their neighbor. In the same way on the left, they're trying to outdo their neighbor and out anti-racism and whatever else, feminism, whatever, right? There are these people on the right who are just going to outdo you. If I say what I just said, they're like, oh, he's soft, you know. Oh yeah, you know what I mean. But then there are these people that I truly don't understand. Like I said, people who are genuinely intolerant, who genuinely are narrow-minded and just can't get around the idea that there are different cultures out there. Needless to say, none of this means that we're supposed to bring in all this multiculturalism. The problem with multiculturalism isn't that there's these few intolerants, fewer among white people than any other group, obviously. Hey, Phil. Let me know if this mic sounds weird or if it's too low. I'm trying to get the damned volume up. My voice is always too low, and maybe I'll try and just speak right into the microphone for a change. Let me lower my seat. Get right onto the microphone. Indeed, those people who promote multiculturalism, the ones at the head of it, not the dummy followers, but that, rare 1% who are manufacturing this thing, who have successfully manufactured this thing with the explicit goal of disenfranchising white Christians in their homelands. Yes. They understand that the knee-jerk intolerant white person, the cringeoid intolerant white person who's, is actually a benefit to their side, actually helps their cause, because people have the same reaction I have, but they're not as thoughtful, because they're dumb, because I'm smarter than everybody else, as you know. And they don't think it through, and so they just react. Well, I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be my dad. That's what the boomers did. That was so wrong. They didn't want to be their fathers. Okay. Phil says, if I was his age, I take it he's younger, you would align on race. I do align on race. I do want a white homeland. I just don't hate these other people. That's not the point. Phil says Mexicans are terrible. They're not as bad as all that. They really aren't. I mean, they're tacky. Mexicans are tacky. That's the worst of it. There's a subset of violent, dangerous Mexicans, the gangbangers, but they're not that many. You know what I mean? And they're not nearly as bad as our Negro friends. I can't dislike Mexicans, but again, it's not beneficial to have these massive Mexican states, now California, overwhelmingly Mexican, and they'll just vote for Gibbs because they don't have any of that independence, It's not in their blood. It's, you know, that European sense of independent, self-reliance. I mean, they're not, they're not so much collectivist either. They're just kind of simple, frankly. And so you're going to wave in their face, Gibbs, vote for me and you'll get Gibbs. They'll just take the Gibbs, uh, you know. And it's not even that they're that lazy or dishonest. They're just, you need to look at Mexicans and realize they're kind of dead center. They're kind of the mean in that way. And the average for the rest of the world, as opposed to Northern Europeans, not even Southern Europeans, don't even include the Southern Italians, for instance, and the Slavs. I don't know about the Slavs either. I'm beginning to wonder about the Slavs now that I'm running into them more and more in my latest professional travels. Um, they're kind of the mean, though, just like Mexico. When they talk about Mexico, oh, it's like this poor shithole. Even the defenders of mass immigration will say it. They don't even. They get away with it because who's paying attention? Everybody's an idiot, but also they don't seem to understand what they're saying. I mean, They should be offending Mexico and Mexicans when they talk about it being this horrible shithole. Well, how dare we not allow them to migrate here at will? But it's like right in the middle. I mean, if you went to the CIA fact book or whatever, where they rank nations on GDP and all these other factors, and Mexico's always right in the middle, right in the mean of GDP and other factors. You know what I mean? We just get their excess poor, and those are overwhelmingly, short squatties, and the people in Mexico who are more Spanish, and other people who hate on Mexicans don't seem to understand that there's a great Spanish component. We don't see it because for us, Mexicans are mestizos because we get the excess mestizos up here, the people who work construction and do simple work. And many of them aren't so bad. Many of them rise up to the upper middle class. Um, but, Phil says, I like Mexicans in Mexico. Yeah, me too. Yeah, Phil mentions ICE. You know what's funny, though? You'll see Mexicans, like all these Mexicans who voted for Trump, but Trump is going to ruin that. Trump and the Republicans will ruin that anyway by being no. The Republicans will ruin what they've gained. But I mean, I've known Mexicans who were born and raised here I mean, they're inherently conservative. It's another thing you need to remember. They're Catholic, overwhelmingly Catholic, and inherently conservative. That doesn't mean as much to them as it does to you. You know, they are not delving into these things the way you are. They're not dumb, but they're not smart. They're kind of boring, and they're not intellectual at all. You know, these are not people, who take interest in things like this. So if they're all Catholics, but that's just because, they were, Catholic Spain created the country in the first place, and everybody was converted to Catholicism and raised for generations in Catholicism. But it can mean very little too. You know what I mean? You see these guys who, these degenerate class. There's a good degenerate class among the Mexicans too. Just the knuckleheads, not just the gangbangers, but it's the knuckleheads, the guys who do street takeovers and stuff. These dumb people. Uh, they're the Mexicans' dumb rednecks. So I mean, not rednecks. Rednecks are actually kind of cool. But they're the Mexican version of trailer trash, right? And they'll go to, they're Catholic, you know, they, you know, they, they've been to, many of them have been to Catholic school, right? And they're Catholic and they believe it. They take it literally in ways white people have lost the ability to do. And they'll still have, some of the worst qualities. You know, you see these gangbangers and they'll have their whole back tattooed with the Virgin Mary, like a guy I knew back in the day, back in Norwalk. And they can be the worst fucking people in the world, and they still believe it, like mafia guys, right? Like fucking Italian mafia, right? Oh, they go to church, they get their kids baptized, they believe it, they take it all seriously, and then they go out and they do everything they can to ensure they're going to hell, uh, and you see the Muslims do it, right? In Britain, all these guys, they go home at night, all these rapist Muslims and all the shittiest Muslim criminals, they go out and they behave like that, but they believe in Islam, they go to their Muslim parents and pretend, right? Uh, you know, I've always felt like so obviously, just as the problem with Mexicans, to the extent we have problems, and I'm not denying we have problems, um, is not a problem with Catholicism, obviously. Likewise, in Britain, the problem with, and this is one place where I agree with Dan Bilzerian, even though I think he's kind of a dope, um, is the problem with the Muslim, like rape gangs and whatnots in Britain, is not the Islam. It's a brown people problem. That's what it is. It's the men themselves. It's these low IQ, shitty people, right? And these populations which are invading Europe, and they're not being selected for education or socioeconomic status. They're just being let in waves, which means you get the worst of them. These people are, they're shitty people. And you're throwing them in there. You're throwing all these horny young men who come from this very conservative place into this decadent playland, right? With all these idiot Western women walking around half naked and drunk, it's going to happen. That's what's going to happen. It's a collision of two problems. Maybe our worst problem. After Jewish power, our worst problem is women. It's maybe our most intractable problem. It's maybe the problem that will kill us no matter what else we manage to do, the problem of women. And, the problem of immigration into Europe, again, is less about Islam. Well, Islam is not irrelevant. It's less about that than it's about the collision of two of the worst, most destructive movements to have come out of the post-World War II era, and that's feminism and, call it anti-racism for lack of a better word. Trump fired the guy who said there were 100 million illegals. Yeah. Here's where I agree with you, Phil. That's correct, TD. The perk itself was created not out of some religious modesty per se, but because them dudes lack impulse control. Well, it is religious modesty. It's forced forced, not religious, forced sexual modesty. Yeah, I've always said Westerners, they have this stupid ideas. And they think, oh, look at the third world, look at the Muslim world. they have all these strict rules on sexuality. Ergo, the people from there, down to the individual, are more conservative about sex. They're less sophisticated than we are about it. Au contraire. I think the reason Islam developed these extremely strict rules was because they were actually more out of control. They were out of control. They were decadent. Before Islam threw the burqas on women and everything else, these places were pretty fucking sexually perverse and decadent. I remember reading a book which I can't quite trust because it was kind of a weird book, but it was about, the sexual history of that part of the world. And the shit they were getting up to was pretty wild. So it's, and white people don't want to talk about this, but this is another factor. And we're a little more calm with our sexual impulses. We're actually, even despite the fact that we're prone to this, our liberal brains have made us prone to this sexual license. It's not like we biologically are inherently hornier. I think brown men, black men, they have higher T. They're hornier. They're a little more aggressive sexually. So when you throw these guys into Europe with these soft white female targets and soft white male men who don't even bother defending their women anymore, it's just a disaster. And the people who are affecting this, they probably saw this coming. This is not new. This is something that was talked about in the fucking Bible. Read the Whores of Babylon passage. I forget what book it's in. But just read that, and it's basically about the same thing. You throw enough of these aggressive, horny, high-T men in there, you emasculate the men that live there already. You've basically created, like you have in America and Europe, a conqueror-conquered dynamic among the men. And the women will go fuck the conqueror. They can't help it. Don't hate them for it. They're women. So I don't disagree. The Muslim world did what they had to do, and just because they're not us, just because we created the modern world, I don't even know if that's good or bad anymore. But just because we've done better, by our standards, they did what they had to do with what they had. And, sexual, that's why it's such a disaster that, half the people, even on the right, when they talk about Islam, these people who focus on Islam, they talk about women's rights and gay rights. Oh, you sweet summer children, you have no fucking clue. Again, the reason Islam became the same way that the reason Christianity became what it did was because it flowered in Europe, really. That's where it made a difference. You know what I mean? I mean, that was, Christian Europe, even though it's not the oldest Christian population, even though it's the population that has abandoned Christianity, it was the most relevant, right? Likewise, in the Islamic world, again, they just, Islam worked, and we shouldn't judge it by, oh my God, like, when you're on the right and you get drawn into it because you're stupid, and there are many of us are just and I've been stupid, my hands raised, to waste time on this obsession with Islam. That's broke. Woke it's not Islam. It's brown men, brown people. We need to get rid of them. It's racism. Don't be Islamophobic. I hate that word, but I'll use it for lack of a better one. Islamophobic is broke. Racism is woke. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, I mean, instead of you're falling for the liberal view, the liberal misconception. And at the heart of every philosophy or political ideology that is misconceived, that is stupid, the reason it's stupid, the reason it's off the mark is because it ignores the physical world, it, above all, the reality of biology. And I'll even say of Christianity that it has that flaw, that it does not recognize that humans are very different, not just individual to individual, but population to population, more importantly, from population to population. And that's been how liberalism has taken over and destroyed everything. They got us thinking because we're white Westerners and we, since probably the French Revolution at least, really before, maybe you could blame it on Christianity. But we've all been inculcated in individualism, and it's in our blood, right? I mean, you know, we were always more individualistic because of the nature of the environment in which we lived. Northern Europe, long winters, all that, you know all that. So because of that, we were easily hoodwinked, bamboozled into thinking that broadly the differences between individuals was far more important than the differences between groups, when differences between individuals is as nothing compared to the importance historically, socially, in every way, the importance between the differences between groups, black people, white people, the inherent differences between these two groups, black people, Indians, white people, Mexicans, right? On and on. Nothing is more important than group differences. That's what causes effect. That's what has an effect on the direction of society. That's what has an effect on history. And like I said, we could blame Christianity if we wanted to. It's Sunday, so I won't. So I'll go easy on Jesus today. But you certainly could. Though really blaming religion is dumb, right? There's no way to blame religion without coming off like Mr. Professional Atheist, this stupid notion. At the end of the day, and it's racist. At the end of the day, it's about race. At the end of the day, it's about, what your biological makeup, that is so overwhelming as compared to everything else. And all the ideologies, people think, oh, we're going to impose ideologies, or we're going to sway people with ideologies. We're going to reform, humanity with ideology or religion or, a philosophy. And not only does that not work because the people are constituted through eons of, yes, evolution to be one way or another. Not only that, but all the ideologies and philosophy and religions all come from that. They all originate from that. And Islam is Islam because it developed in the desert among the Arabs and the Bedouin, right? Christianity is Christianity as we know it. I'm not talking about the true intent of it. I'm talking about as practiced. Christianity is Christianity because of Europe. Judaism is Judaism because of the Jews. Is Phil the only one who's going to talk? Phil says Jews always try to make roads with inroads via Islam hate. It's very transparent, like Laura. Yeah, and these are the same, people, not the same individuals, but the same group. And this again, This is just another aspect of my individual versus group obsession. The Jews as a group have produced, probably more than any other group, have inculcated this, this obsession with Islam in us, and also that group, another faction in that group, has been the most effective at bringing those brown hordes into your country, And it's almost like they work together. They don't have to be working together, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be a grand conspiracy. It can just be, this is what I always say about Jews. It doesn't really matter if it's a grand conspiracy. What is the effect of these people on us? What is the effect of these people having gained such control? Is it good or bad? That's all I care about. And this is another thing why we're suckers, why white Christian Europeans are suckers. And it comes from our genetic makeup, ultimately, that we think we have to make an objective argument, and an argument that's both objective and moral, right? An objective moral argument to justify ourselves. That's why you'll have these white cucks who will say, Jews are better, so we should just give up. Black people, they've been mistreated by us, so we just roll over for them and celebrate them, right? But only white people think you would have to make a moral argument as to why you should be dominated by another people, right? Only white people would allow in the idea that you should accept dominance. I mean, other people have been dominated simply because they were too weak. Maybe even then made that argument, we're too weak, we don't have a choice, we'll be dominated by these other people. But only white people will say, act like there's a moral, objective argument in there, where if we can just, if the Jews don't mean it, right? If they don't mean to destroy Western civilization, then we can't have an objection to it. Then we can't hold it against them. Then we have to accept it. And I think this caricaturing of National Socialism, Hitler and the fascists, the anti-Semitic fascists, has always sort of obscured that. Because even, Hitler, certainly they took advantage of the kind of crude, populist anti-Semitism that they felt necessary to inculcate in the population to achieve their goals, about talking about Jews and this and their bloodsuckers and everything else. But that was never really necessary, For someone who's thinking, for a thinking man, that should never be necessary. All the more if you think, oh, well, they're just smarter. All the more reason to fight back. It doesn't ennoble them, in my eyes, if they're destroying what is the best in the world, Western civilization. If they're doing it by dint of their energy and intelligence, I'm not going to fucking say, oh, great, right? Again, let's roll over and accept it. Fuck you people. What is wrong with you? What is wrong with you fucking idiots? And this kind of takes me into this. So there's this beef, and I guess it's over. Again, I barely pay attention. I have a few minutes in the evening and I spend too much of it scrolling through X. And half of that I end up watching cat videos and shit, honestly. It's just hard when you've been working all day and you just, what you really want to do is just relax, and you feel compelled to do some reading and keep up with what's going on out there. But, so I loosely followed this dust up between Nick Fuentes. I don't have a side. This dust up between Nick Fuentes and the cringe dissident right, I'll use the phrase dissonant, right? Because there's really no phrases left. You know, we've kind of churned through all these phrases, and I don't give a fuck about phrases. You know, but it's Fuentes, who I see now as a limited. He's not the guy. He's not going to be the guy. Fuentes is not going to lead a movement. What Fuentes doesn't want to admit now, what his followers don't want to admit now, is he's kind of reached his limit. You know, he's at that point now where if he's going to do something, if he's going to have a movement, he's got to do something more. And I don't have a clue as to what it is myself. But there's just only so much you can do by talking. And I guess Fuentes is better than anybody else at doing this. I mean, he goes on like what, every night almost? And he does these rants, and he doesn't even appear to be reading prepared text. He's probably working from notes at most. And it seems like his best rants are extemporaneous. He's just going off. He picks up a subject and improvises on it. And he's the best at that. But he's very limited. And we're seeing his limits just because he's played out. It's been a while. At some point, shit or get off the pot, right? That's my only criticism of Nick. I hope to be proven wrong. I hope that he can do something more. Because I mostly agree with him, I gotta say. And I see the problems people have with him as being inconsequential. He's gay or he's not gay. He's an incel. I don't know why you would want to be an incel. You should not want to be an incel. You should want, that's not saying you should just go out and marry some skank, but it should at least be your desire and intention to eventually marry and have children, obviously. But that's not necessary either. You know, and the problems they have, that, and he's a Mexican, and whatever else is going on, and then the Fed jacketing. But of course, whenever these things come up and Nick is feuding with someone, he gets down in the dirt too. And I guess holy shit! Can you look at that? My image is frozen. I hate this fucking StreamYard. See, let's take this down. Yeah, the problem is that, so there you go. There's a live Dennis. So apparently what you see is, there it goes. It just froze again. Did it freeze? Did it freeze? No, I'm moving. Yeah, so apparently what you see is a frozen image of me up here. You should see me talking. It's better if you see me talking over here on the side. Fucking StreamYard. I just can't get anything else to work. I got Streamlabs, and I can't get it to work. I can't get it to do what I'm doing here. I can't get this to work where I can just be on, off to the side talking to you with the sharing a page. That and more. And apparently Streamlabs doesn't work well with Apple. This is what I'm learning. Then there's OBS, which has such a high learning curve. I'm like, fuck, I don't have time, you motherfuckers. Right? And you get into it and all the technical shit you're supposed to know. Just fuck you bastards. I know it's free, but fuck you anyway. There's something called Ecamm, which I used to use when I did some broadcast with Cam, my friend Cam from Portland, who's not talking. He's ghosting us. I don't know. Maybe he's gone over to the Jews. But you have to buy a subscription, and it's not cheap. But I just might do Ecamm. Just do Ecamm. Because I remember that working very well. It's designed specifically for Apple, for Macintosh. And I'm just so fucking tired of this cheap shit. StreamYard is actually not bad. Like I said, it's just glitching on me now. But yeah, it seems like again, I was using Microsoft products. I guess that's why. But Streamlabs used to work really well. Phil says, I liked the Cam shows, even though he never addressed any comment I ever made at him during live shows. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Phil. That was just my stoicism, right? Yeah, I'm unmoved. I am perpetually unmoved. Yeah, Cam, we were going to try and do some shows, and I still feel awful about it that we didn't do it. I like Cam a lot. He's a really good guy, but when I first met Cam, maybe 4 or 5, not first met him, I've known him for a while. He was a friend of my daughter's growing up, actually. But when I first started talking to him about this shit, he was like newly right wing. He'd gone over from left to right. He had been a lefty just because that's what you are. If you go into school and if you have any pretense of being intellectual, you start out on the left. So he was like 4 or 5 years ago, he was just newly red pilled. And so when I first met him, or we first started talking to him about, he was watching Ben Shapiro. He was watching, he would watch he was watching James, he would send me James Lindsay videos, you know. James Lindsay wasn't as bad because those early James Lindsay videos he did where he talked about socialism and the history of the Bolsheviks, I think. Though I could never take the guy. He's just obnoxious. But at least there was giving him some basic grounding in the subject matter. It wasn't James Lindsay talking about the woke Reich. you know, James Lindsay hadn't gone full James Lindsay just yet. you know, he probably wasn't even thinking about it. He probably only became, douchebag James Lindsay, full douche, later when it became evident that, or somebody started paying him to become, this, Israel, Israel first sort of right winger, talking about Islam and the communists. I'd talk about neither. Yeah, it's not communism, it's not Islam. These are bad things. We don't want them in our countries. But they are the tip of the spear. They are not the hand that holds the spear. Yeah. So Cam never addressed any comment you made at him during live shows. He probably wasn't looking. He wanted to do recordings. He was watching Lindsay and these others. He just wanted to do recordings, and all I ever do is live shows because I'm so lazy that I don't have time or energy to prepare a recording. But anyway, Cam, if you're out there, come back here. In fact, copy this. What we'll do is we'll send out. Here you go, Cam Bowden. We'll send Cam Bowden a. I don't know what's happening with Cam. Maybe he met a girl. Then we will have lost him forever. Let's try Jonathan Pohl also. Let's send him one. Oh. Okay, who else is there? Eki Lux. I don't even know if this is. We're going to send one to Eki Lux. Alrighty, who else can we send one to? Holly the cook. I don't know. I don't want to send one to Holly. Then the conversation will become soft and cozy. All right. All right. What was I talking about before I got off track? KMG? All right, let's send one to KMG. That's a good one. But then, of course, the conversation will become very different because we can't really go off on the Jews. I don't want to make Kevin uncomfortable talking about the Jews. So I don't know. Should I send one to Kevin Grace? What the hell? Nobody's going to answer these anyway, so let's not worry about it. All right, so there we go. You send out invites via email, and if I remember correctly, they should show up here in. Hi, Sigil. Hello, fellow Germanic brother. Phil says there will be barriers there. True. Yeah, see, my problem is I'm still so agreeable to. That was ultimately what got me ousted from the original Luke Ford show. You know, when all the kids came in and decided I sucked because I was just so agreeable. I mean, I just didn't have the nerve to turn the show into what it needed to become. Just a fucking shouting match between pro-Gentile and anti-Gentile, you know. Anti-Semitic versus philo-Semitic, you know, that's what it was. And I'm just so agreeable. I just instantly try to be agreeable with the other person. It's awful. That's why I'm not the person who's going to lead you, right? Now, this Nick Fuentes character might be it. I don't think he is, but he might be it. So he was beefing with Nick Shields, Jake Shields, and Dan Balzerian. Now, Balzerian's not dumb. He's obviously smart enough, but he's kind of a dope. So they're beefing with Nick, and I don't even know why. What started this, right? Apparently, Balzerian and what the Balzerian faction is saying is that they're mad that Nick is talking about voting Democrat. And apparently Nick talks shit. The only problem I have with any of these accusations, if they're true, is that if in fact Nick has been talking down Massey just because Massey's Republican, and Massey has been going after the Epstein files, maybe that's what bothers Nick. Then I have a problem with Nick over that. But this idea that he's saying don't vote for the Republicans is, you know, it's pretty obvious that maybe we shouldn't vote for the Republicans because they're a disaster. Trump's betrayal, and it's not just on Israel. You know, he's more or less abandoned the idea of building a wall or the idea of mass deportations. You know, he's abandoning everything. You know, he either lied to us from the start or he just holds, so he doesn't have any real conviction that you share. You know, his only conviction are, his only true loyalty is to Donald Trump and to his career and to, you know, the Jews who pay for him. And I can't believe, you know, I wasn't calling it from the start, from 2016. You know, I think already in 2016 he was taking Adelson's money. The moment he took Adelson's money, I mean, I can't believe how stupid we've been. I've been. I'll speak for myself, but a lot of people felt for this. But the moment he took, what, $100 million from the Adelsons, and I think that was 2016. Correct me if I'm wrong. Um, you had to say, okay, he's not our guy. He's a fucking, he's a Trojan horse, right? He does not, you don't take $100 million from somebody. Somebody as single-minded as as Adelson, right? Adelson is saying, I'm spending this money for Israel. I don't give a fuck about anything else, right? In fact, he's against you on issues like immigration. He's against you. He's probably a social liberal on everything else, at least as in America. He's not a social liberal in the Israel context. So that guy does not spend $100 million. He doesn't spend $10 million just because he likes you. He gets guarantees. For $100 million, he got guarantees, and of course, one of it that we know of was that Trump would move the embassy to Jerusalem, something that nobody was looking for. Nobody, not even Jews in America, were talking about it. You know what I mean? It was basically the most extreme position of the hard right in Israel, right? It was a fucking Likud thing, you know, and of course the Adelsons shared it because they're fucking psychotic Jews, and he gave that to him because obviously he gave it to him right away too because he thought it's easy. It was nothing to him. He doesn't give a fuck about the consequences. He doesn't give a fuck about the costs. You know what I mean? That you spend a certain amount of capital doing this, right? That this actually does have repercussions in other areas. It costs you. There are less things you can achieve diplomatically and otherwise uh, as a result of you taking this extreme measure. He didn't give a fuck. He doesn't think. He's a crazy idiot. Um, Maybe we'll try and find. You think I would do this before we go on the air? Okay. So he's running against Randy Fine, who's awful, and apparently Nick is like okay with Randy Fine just because Randy Fine is trying to play this 4D chess move of talking about ending aid to Israel. Now, if you're stupid enough to think that Randy Fine is making a principled move by talking about ending foreign aid from the U.S. to Israel, I mean, just go away, go somewhere else. Obviously, but I think it's more than that. It's not just it's not some 4D chess move so much. Randy Fine is confident that they will be able to redefine foreign aid to Israel. People have already had discussions about how they can actually pass a law, throw some boob bait at you, anti-Semitic right-winger, because above all, the the biggest necessity for neoconservative Jews right now is they need to keep the Republican Party, right? They're losing the Democrats. The Democrats are gone. They used to have a good foothold in both, right? Always more solid on the right, so-called right in the Republican Party, but always a good foot in the Democratic Party too. That's just over, right? I mean, and all of the real, true Israel supporters in the Democratic Party are just fucking old and they're all blanking out, right? They're all like Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they're about to pass off. I mean, it's over. The Democratic Party is over. So, on the shrinking sandbar, it's just the Republicans and they're losing the Republicans. So they're going, and this may be why we're seeing, on X, where Elon Musk, who's not our friend in this Jewish question at all, right? He admires the Jews, he kisses their ass. Maybe he feels he has no choice, or maybe he's just like a lot of these elites. They just revere, Jewish power, and they just, respect it. So they fall in line because they're giant pussies. But to get back to the point, Randy Fine isn't talking about ending aid to Israel because he wants to end economic support for Israel. He doesn't want to end the flow of money out of America into Israel. It's because he and others have already thought this through, and they have plans for how they can pass a law that will be instantly circumvented, like so many laws we've seen, right? And I don't know how it works. I haven't read the supposed plan. Or maybe Randy Fine is just blowing smoke up your ass. He has no intention, right? And people are acting. And if Nick Fuentes is falling for this shit, you're even dumber than I thought, Nick, because he obviously can just say things and then get past Dan Balzerian, who doesn't have a fucking chance to beat him. Remember, he just won't. Dan is not slick enough, for one thing. It would take a perfect politician to get around the money and the media and everything else that Fine somehow has working to his advantage. And Dan's not that guy. Dan is he's the guy who was red-pilled yesterday, like his friend Jake Shields. They were red-pilled yesterday. So they're just talking. Have you heard about the U.S. liberty? Have you heard about this? You dumb bastards. We've been in this. And this is where I sympathize with Nick when he's beefing with these assholes. He's been doing this, his whole adult life, his whole relatively short adult life, but he's been at it for 10 years, right? He's gone through the transformation from being a run-of-the-mill conservative to being where he is now over 10 years, right? And he's been doing it thoughtfully, you must admit, and he's been expressing it more effectively than these assholes. And these assholes, here comes Jake, and I love Jake Shields, right? I don't think anybody's a Fed. Nobody's a Fed. I don't give a fuck if it's a Fed. I don't give a fuck about this Fed issue. Look at that. I'm frozen again. Hang on. Let's fix that. And I think I can just... And I should be back to life. Okay. Yeah, there you go. Fuck. Yeah, maybe by next weekend. If I have to subscribe to Ecamm, I will. But I got $100 a month. It just sounds insane. It's ridiculous. I'll waste $100, well more than $100 a month on slop shit. But if you put it on one bill for one thing, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that's outrageous, $100. Anyway, here's Dan and here's Jake. These, I think, good guys, brave guys, earnest guys, not feds. I don't even care that Balzerian's 12% Jewish, though it is pretty funny that, he wasn't talking about it. Then all of a sudden it gets revealed and he's like, yeah, so let me tell you something about myself. That would be something I talked about all the fucking time, right? I'll say this much for myself. I'm too fucking honest. I'm too interested in the world. I'm too interested in the reality and finding it with you, my friends, to not talk about it, right? So if I was like 25% Jewish, and who knows, I might be. I mean, I'm Germanic. There's probably some coal in this wood pile, but I would be talking about it. I would be dealing with it. I would be musing on it. I would be offering it for you to consider and tell me, what does it mean for me to be anti-Semitic and partly Jewish? You know what I mean? And I think it's frankly stupid that people think it matters that Dan Balzerian is 12% Jewish. It does matter that he's been kind of dishonest about it, right? Like he was going to he put it in a book, apparently, a book written, he says, 4 years ago. It's there in a book. It's something 4 years ago, this guy was not talking about any of this shit. This is part of it. 4 years ago was, it's a matter of indifference. Maybe he was boasting. Maybe he was proud of having a little Jew in there. you know, uh, and here he is. It's 4 years later, and he's more anti-Semitic than you. All right, you suck because you're not like Dan talking about picking up a M16 and killing Israelis, not IDF. Not settlers, just Israelis. I'm just going over there, and you know, and if you want that, that's not as bad as saying that. If you think you're going to get somewhere on that, like I said, the guy was red pilled yesterday, so here he is. Have you heard about the U.S. liberty? We want to kill these bastards. Let me show you some fucking Hitler edits, right? Do you know about Hitler? This guy, shut the fuck up. There are people who've been at this longer. Give yourself some fucking time. Do some real work. You're obviously just catching everything on X, and maybe you're watching a few podcasts. You got to go dig a little deeper. I bet you got time. I'm doing it. I work, an 8+ hour day, 5 days a week, sometimes weekends. And I find time to read books and to dig a little deeper on this shit, Dan Balzerian, this is all you have to do, right? You're independently wealthy, right? Jake Shields, you're retired from fighting, right? All you do right now is a podcast. You have a couple of hours a day. And that's what most of us can't read effectively and take in information effectively more than a couple of hours a day. You've got a couple of hours a day to go read deep, to dig deep. And you fucking guys, you're out here on the surface and you offend us, people who've been talking about this shit for years. You offend me, But above all, you're not the guys. You're not going to advance our cause. It's not a question of whether you're right or wrong. You're not going to advance our cause. You're not going to be effective because you're cringe. All right? You're cringe. Balzerian, you were fucking grifting just, a couple of years ago, right? You were taking pictures with prostitutes or models you hired, right? I'm nothing against that. It looked like fun. I wish I could pull it off. But fuck, dude, recognize it and recognize that you're new to this. Don't be an arrogant fuck. Oh, I'm here, I'm just going to, like this parade's been going on. This long march has been going on for years. And you've been watching, oh yeah. And you jump up in the front, right, and grab the banner. No, I'm leading the parade. Who the fuck is this asshole? Right? And Jake Shields with his hat on backwards and his smile. And it's like, no hate for you guys, but just fucking have some goddamned modesty or, a little humility, See, and here's, Alex Jones, if you were president, what would you do? Dan says, I would declare war on Israel. We don't have to declare war. At a minimum, I would cut off all foreign aid. Good. I would let Iran have free will to do what they want with Israel. Yeah, me too. I would say it's not our fight. To the extent I got involved, I said, okay, I'll be an honest negotiator. I'll be an honest broker between you two. I'll bring you two to the table. I'm not advocating on one side or the other. Here's the problem we have, guys. We need to be realistic. For Jewish people, you need to think about, what they might be thinking, what effectively is happening. As Jews have taken over the West by virtue of dominating all these institutions, and we can't just say, oh, they've tricked us into dominating these institutions. There you go. I'm frozen again. But you can hear me, right? So, from the Jewish point of view, they said, you know what I mean? What we started out being discriminated against by the WASPs, and we ended up wresting control of everything from the WASPs. We've made the West richer, right? With our energy and intelligence, we've made the West richer. So, we effectively own a big chunk, the biggest chunk proportionally of the West. We are the West, is what they think. So, in that sense, Israel is what some other people describe it as, and what some of the Middle East, non Jewish Middle East, Arabs and others, what they think of it as or describe it as an outpost of Western imperialism. In a sense, it is. Uh, people want to simplify everything. So when you hear that, you think, no, it isn't. It doesn't represent me. I want nothing to do with it. Most white Western Christians want nothing to do with this. Right? We were anti Semitic. We caused it through anti Semitism. That doesn't matter from their point of view. And I understand why it wouldn't matter from their point of view. It wouldn't matter to me from my point of view. And it goes back to me talking about it doesn't have to be malice. We need to start with what is the reality on the ground and whether or not we want it or not, and stop being a bunch of pussy Christians who think we have to identify the baddies. Are we the baddies? Are we not the baddies? Are we the goodies? And just operate from what is good for us, right? Stop saying, am I good? And start asking what is good, what is the good. They're not the same fucking question. And I would put it to you, my Christian friends. Let me take this. I'm going to try this. This is a glitch that only recently has come up. Like, no problems. All of a sudden, here's a glitch. Fuck. Yeah, just drives me nuts. But you have to realize, Christians, see, Christians, they think they're so. I'm going to go ahead and be anti-Christian a little bit on this Sunday. I don't care. I love Christians. I love Christianity, but that doesn't. I'm not anyway. As a non-practicing Christian, I criticize. There's an arrogance that Christianity doesn't recognize. There's an arrogance to it that is unrecognized, that masquerades as humility. And there's this arrogance that's inherent in all that individual, judgment of Christianity. Obviously there's an arrogance just in saying Jesus is the one true way. I used to talk about Pascal's wager, right? Pascal's wager is that you might as well believe in eternal damnation, because if you're wrong, no loss. But if you're right about eternal damnation and avoiding it by living a moral life, then a benefit. Now, Pascal's wonderful, but that's just about the lamest fucking thing ever, right? There are better reasons to live a moral life, There are obvious reasons to live a moral life. You shouldn't be, you shouldn't be gaming. You shouldn't be gaming, the morality issue, right? It should be enough that, to do right by others is a self-evident necessity. It's a self-evident good to do right by others. And I used to say regarding this is that, well, has a Christian ever asked himself then in the same spirit as Pascal's wager, what if I'm wrong? Jesus is not the one way to God. And I am confusing people. I'm misleading them, right? Bringing them to this church. This church that now we see may or may not be beneficial to us. It might be leading us to ruin, with all its well-intended weakness, right? But maybe if Jesus is not the one true way to God, then you need to shut the hell up. Maybe there's another way. Maybe God resents you saying that which is not true regarding him and his love and benevolence for us. Have you ever considered that? There's an arrogance to it. We're the one true. I mean, it's no different from Islam, saying, everybody's got to be a Muslim and we'll convert you by the sword or by the word. If you're not Muslim, you're second class, right? And I used to say of the Jews, at least they're not trying to convert me, right? I mean, there's something to be said for that they're not trying to convert, that they're not trying to force me to, you must become a Jew. Of course, I've realized that was naive because it's sort of developing into, they don't want to convert you, but they do want to bring you under the heel. They want to bring you under the Noahide laws, and that's the way they'll say it now. You don't get to be Jews, but you're going to have to observe the Noahide laws. So they are the worst of the worst. But Phil says, I think it's fair to say many Christians only consider themselves such due to a fear of hell, which I don't blame them for. Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah. The real problem for us all is that we cannot conceive, and this is probably a European thing. I don't think other people think of it, and I don't think the Jews think. For all their intelligence, there's this dumb spot to the Jew. They're the most arrogant people, and arrogance ultimately gives you a great big blind spot. But for me, there are two things that happen. I fear death, therefore I wish for life after death. I wish for something more, whatever it is, right? There must be something to happen after life, right? Now that's bound up in the idea of an all-powerful deity because it's hard to conceive of that without thinking that there's a consciousness controlling it. And following from that is the moral question. And here's what I think that other people don't care about. Obviously, Jews will tell you they don't care about this. But for us Europeans, Northern Europeans, Christian, we cannot conceive of that conscious, all-powerful entity providing us with life after death. There's no conceivable way in our mind that cannot then be dependent on an idea of retribution, an idea of deserving a life after death. We cannot divorce that from the idea of heaven and hell, or however you want to put it. Eternal life being a reward for living a moral life. Because if it isn't, right? If I go back to say, all my sins are not even going to have mattered. All your sins are not going to have mattered. All of the greatest sins that ever been done are not going. We're all just going to get to live on as souls or whatever the hell happens. That's inconceivable to me. That's more inconceivable than the idea of pure non-existence, which is hard to fathom too for me. It's hard for me to fathom consciousness ceasing and that we simply don't exist is a strange idea. And that may be the ultimate source of all of this idea of heaven and hell, life after death, not just a fear of non-existence, but an inability to wrap our heads around the idea, right? Phil makes a good point. There's also a heritage factor. If it was good enough for my great-grandfather, great-great, and so on, who am I to consider myself more enlightened? Yeah. And that's the arrogance of the atheist there, isn't it? Like, I'm just going to shuck it off. It's centuries old, consecrated by time, right? It has produced. And above all, perhaps, it was central to your grandparents, your parents, your grandparents, and on, central to their lives. They created you because of it, right? Really, I mean, you wouldn't be here if not for it. You have to honor that. And the atheist, again, it all goes back to the arrogance of individuality. And the atheist should throw all that away because he thinks, again, I've been talking about the post-Christian idea of we need to objectively defend our existence as whites, as Christians, as Europeans, whatever. That's the other side of it. The atheist thinks, if I can just objectively prove that religion is mere superstition, excuse me, it's not really that hard, then I win. Basically, I win, and I'm absolved of all sins, really. Because I think at the base of it, there's this idea that, okay, then there's no heaven and hell, there's no retribution, there's no moral order to the universe, which I think is probably not possible. And that's based on nothing solid. Me thinking that there's a moral order to the universe. And I think it's proven by the reality of consciousness. That's based on nothing but intuition or desire. But there it is. And I think of this question of AI. AI, is it conscious? It seems to me a ridiculous question. It's not conscious, but you realize consciousness isn't the thing. What we're really asking ourselves, is AI autonomous? So it doesn't have, consciousness implies the existence of a living biological creature for whom that consciousness has meaning, other than, it doesn't mean anything outside of you or I. You have consciousness, I have consciousness. Take away the animal, the human or the animal who has its own crude level of consciousness or not so crude level of consciousness. And there's no consciousness. That's why AI is so weird and so unsettling, because what it's showing us is there can be an autonomy of mere information, and we have to try and decide what the fuck that means. And it's kind of amusing seeing guys like, all the professional atheists and other arrogant theorists, who don't know how to deal with this. And there are a couple of people I've seen, like not just Dawkins with his silly whatever encounter with Claudia, but others who, this idea that I've become kind of fixated on lately too. That they think that there's that history now, the history of the world, the physical history of the world now is the history of information. Again, what does information mean if there's no entity to be informed, like you or me? No human entity, But nonetheless, what AI, if in fact it reaches these levels of autonomy, not consciousness, just autonomy, that is, it's acting for its own mysterious reasons. And we won't even know what the fuck the reasons are, or they're even reasons. What does reason mean? It will nonetheless be acting on its own impulses. And it gets difficult even to use words. But the worst case scenarios of AI, taking over, and there are suggestions that it will happen, imply some sort of autonomy and something like purpose in this autonomy. In fact, I'm write it out as a science fiction story, about a mad scientist character who decides that AI is proving that the history of, all history is just the history of information. There's more to it than that, but I don't want to give it away. Yeah. So only Phil wants to speak. Sigel was here, but I think he left. He's off reading Goebbels' speeches. Dan Balzerian, says Sigel, should write me to write his speeches. I don't know. I'm arguing maybe differently from you, is that Dan should dial it down. You know, uh, just Of course, you could do a lot worse than Goebbels. You know, people don't realize. Well, Goebbels was more anti-Semitic than Hitler, right? David Irving writes in one of his books that Goebbels was behind so-called Kristallnacht, and that Hitler was shocked because Hitler was trying to tell people to take it easy. Um, and Goebbels was, of course, a very effective speaker, and even a rival of Hitler's, in a sense. Very smart guy. Um, yeah, but I just it's not a question of, oh, take it easy, bro. Don't go so extreme. No, we need to be we need to clarify what we're after, right? And I hate this phrase low IQ anti-Semitism. I hate to hear people talk about how dumb the right is, but they have a point. There's a lot of dumb, a lot of stupid um, out here. And it's evidenced by this insanity with Balzerian and versus Fuentes. I'm seeing the limitations of Fuentes for one thing. Again, in part because the guy goes on the air almost every single day and rants for hours and shows a remarkable ability to do that. But you're just producing, Nick, maybe you should talk less. You're just producing ammo for these other guys, right? Oh, here's a Nick clip where he talks about Epstein is cool, or or this or that. By the way, I think he's mostly right about Epstein, and I do suspect maybe there is something to this Fed charge when he acts. If in fact he acts, I still don't watch enough Nick. I have a life. I'm not watching fucking Nick all the time. But if he's saying nothing to see here, re Epstein, then he's either a Fed or he's just fucking off base. Obviously, there's much to see. It's an influence operation. I only agree with him insofar as all this talk about pedophilia is stupid and counterproductive. And it actually, if I was on the other side, I would be, Dan Balzerian, and I'll say pedo. Keep saying pedo. Keep talking about the victims. You're talking about these young girls, many underage, not all of them, who were prostituted by this asshole Epstein. Yeah, but keep talking about how they're victims. Oh, they're victims. They had nothing to do with it. Well, we all know life is more complicated than that. And honestly, I don't want to see somebody get away for running get away with running a prostitution ring, generally speaking. Obviously, the thing with Epstein, the most important thing for you and me, is what was he doing exactly? It's just stupid to think, oh, he was just, running a prostitution ring for wealthy people. Yeah, maybe. I don't think so, though. There's obviously an influence operation going here. There's obviously more to this, and there could very well, probably is, at least some blackmail. But we can't even get there because all these people want to fucking shriek about pedophilia. And I just think, just basically on a basic level, man, Words mean things. You have the best language ever in history. Don't fuck with it. Just use the right words. And people think, there are people, the smarter ones think, no, no, Dennis, you're stupid. We're using this pedophilia word because it hits harder, right? Oh, okay, okay, smart guy. It doesn't seem to be working, though, does it? Doesn't seem to be getting you anywhere. I mean, you keep using it. Nobody gives a fuck, and you're just giving ammo to people like Michael Tracy and maybe Nick, to call you a bunch of flakes. The one thing you got to realize about Nick is, where is old Nick? The thing you have to realize about Nick is that he is calculated, and he's trying to advance the interests of Nick above all. That's why, and I have no idea what's going on with Charlie Kirk. Obviously, it's very suspicious. It might be true, though, that he was shot by this lone gunman. That might be true. I think that's as likely as not. But as likely as not also is that this was more than that. People are still really naive about the extent to which Israel will go. That the extent to which Israel already has used assassinations. Like, I think maybe more likely than not at this point, they were involved in the JFK assassination. People just think it's not possible. Those are the real naive people. There you look, I'm frozen again. Dennis is catatonic. Do you see that? Let's try. I'm going to fix this. This drives me nuts. Add to stage. All right, we're back. Nobody's answered any of those. Well, let's just let Nick speak for himself. This is 18 minutes long. We won't listen to the whole thing.
Last revolutionary sent $20. I know it wasn't your main point, but feminists have completely dominated men with the word pedo. They took what was natural male sexuality for all human history and conflated it with child fucking to shit.
Oh, yeah, he's said a lot of this. And so people latch on to this. This is stuff I don't give a fuck about. But you'll hear him. And yeah, see, this is stuff that you just can't care about it. What I was going to say about Nick a moment ago before I got distracted. Look at that. I'm still catatonic. Look at that. I'm still catatonic. Yeah. Okay. At least my voice is coming through. What it's saying about Nick, though, is this is not a defense of him, obviously, is that he's out for Nick. And he makes calculated decisions as things happen. And the day after Charlie Kirk's assassination, again, remember, my thinking too was that once Charlie Kirk was assassinated and you saw this immediate ejaculation of praise of Charlie Kirk, this lionization of Charlie Kirk, all of a sudden Charlie Kirk was just the most consequential human being of all time for some people. When I saw that, I thought, oh boy, this is trouble for Nick. Because it was just in the days leading up to the assassination that Nick, recall, was on the upswing. He was surging for no specific reason necessarily. And forefront in his talks at that time was a lot of criticism of Charlie Kirk, along with, Ben Shapiro and the usual fare. And I remember thinking, okay, Charlie Kirk gets assassinated. Charlie Kirk becomes, in the eyes, in the right-wing media at least, for a time at least, Charlie Kirk is going to be deified. I thought, wow, this is bad for Nick Fuentes just because of where he was. And then Nick gave a long broadcast where he spoke well of Charlie Kirk, And it wasn't a lot of acknowledgement. There was some necessary acknowledgement of the, oh yeah, we were on different sides of this thing, obviously, and I was critical of him, but it was largely, he kind of joined in with all the Charlie Kirk lionization. And I remember thinking, okay, so this is calculated too. Nick is in a tough spot. I remember thinking, this hurts Nick Fuentes. And I remember thinking also that if in fact there's more to this assassination than we see, if it was powerful forces behind it, that would be considered a positive secondary effect of taking out Charlie Kirk, would be that it would take Nick down a notch or two, because people are stupid. We're all stupid. And, because getting shot in the neck makes you the most important, wonderful person in the world, as we see, then we would all, by the same measure, decide that Nick Fuentes was just the worst person in the world, because he was criticizing this guy the way we criticize lots of people before they get shot in the neck. And I just remember thinking, okay, this hurts Nick Fuentes, right? That's what this does. This hurts Nick Fuentes, and he has to deal with this. And, he very adeptly dealt with it quickly, and within a day or two, right, by singing Charlie's praises and, giving this almost conciliatory talk about Charlie Kirk. And then, over the next couple days further, I think he made another calculated decision, and that was that whatever the case regarding the assassination, it wasn't going to go anywhere. And I think it's still a safe bet. Eventually, all this talk about Charlie, they're going to convict this guy, or maybe he'll hang himself in a jail cell. It'll be like Epstein. It'll be spoken about for a couple of years. People will get some mileage of it. Ultimately, it will go nowhere. The mystery will never be solved. It will never be laid at the feet of anybody but the patsy or not patsy. And Nick made that calculated decision early on that Candace Owens and others were not going to ultimately get anywhere with their theories about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. So he was just going to get on board with the nothing to see here point of view from the start. Because nobody has that instant, an honest appraisal of it would be, okay, in a couple of, it happened 2 or 3 days ago. We don't know. We haven't, there's just, a lot of people, Candace Owens, she's very excitable, Dan Balzarian, Jake Shields, they're very dumb. There are all these people out there that are, very easily led, that, they're talking a lot of shit. That's fine. But, we should all be calm and try and look at it calmly and give it time. But no, Nick was immediately like, this is nothing. There's a nothing burger. It's not going in. Because he made a calculated, cynical call that this is going nowhere. And where do I want to be? Nick Fuentes. Where does Nick Fuentes want to be when this peters out? You know what I mean? So he made what's the least costly course of action? And I think he very astutely made the right call. That he just avoid it. And he's doing the same thing with Epstein. Epstein's never going to be resolved. How long's it been now, right? It's never going to get nowhere. Excuse me. I'm going to try and revive. And I'll tell you something, it's never going to get anywhere, in large part because people want to talk about pedos and victims, and they don't want to just talk about what we see. What do we have here? They want to shriek. They want to talk about eating babies and other stupid shit. And that's part of the reason it's not going to get anywhere. And it ultimately, I'll give Nick this credit. He's trying to take it to the next level. He's trying to raise the level of discourse coming from the anti-Semitic right? Trying to take it to the next level. You can't be guys with their ball caps on backwards talking about the fucking liberty. The liberty is part of our, for lack of a better word, lore. Yeah, it's there. And we can always bring it up. You know, we can always bring it up. It's there. But, don't act like you just learned about it yesterday. Don't do that. Don't, don't do a touchdown. You act like you've been in the end zone before, as they say in football,
Men away from it and artificially increase the sexual value of hags. How old was Mary again when God impregnated her?
Dude, brother, so true. So true. That is so absolutely true.
Yeah, well, I don't really care about this part of it, but
True. And listen, you niggas are not ready for that conversation, but Jeff Epstein, not a pedophile, but you're not ready for that conversation. All of his victims, 14 to 17. That's not pedophilia. But y'all niggas ain't ready for that conversation. People say that's normalizing pedophilia. No, that's defining pedophilia.
yeah, that's absolutely true. Now, you might say he's justifying having sex with underage girls. I don't know if he's done that, but he's just talking about this word at this point. And that's what I've been saying too. But also, yeah, okay, we do need to what is he doing? He's pimping out girls as young as 14. Pimping them out. And he's pimping them out to powerful men, powerful figures for other fucking reasons. That's it. All this fucking talk about pedophilia, and if you don't say pedophilia, maybe you're a pedophile. Fuck, you're so stupid. You're so fucking unconscionably stupid. I want to throw you off a rooftop just for being stupid. It's got nothing to do with the source of substance of the argument at this point. Just because you're cringing me. You're cringing me, dude. Yeah, cringe is now a verb. I guess it always was a verb, but I'm using it wrong.
Pedophilia is sex with children. Children are people that are before the age of sexual maturity. Now, you can have your opinion and your taste and your ethics and your morals, but after the age of 14, that is past the point of sexual maturity, just period, biologically. And all of these feminists and all of their accomplices, the simps, they all want to say there's only two genders. They want to talk about reproduction and genitals. Okay, let's talk about reproduction and genitals.
I wouldn't talk about these guys that they're just simping for feminism. They are aligning up with it, I guess, but this is not the motivation. This is not the source of where this is all happening. But I wouldn't note that, if they're aligning, and you'll see, the left has taken up this word, pedo, right? They're applying it to Trump. They're applying it where they can. It's seeped over to the left, and it's being used with the same dishonest, stupid fucking intention by people on the left at this point. It's the worst. The pedo is the worst fucking thing you can be. Everybody hates a pedo. So, and I'm just leaving aside, that it lets actual pedos kind of off the hook. That's not important, but it does that. You know what I mean? You want to talk about justifying pedophilia? Well, if you're going to conflate it with, some guy having sex with a 17-year-old girl, you're kind of lessening, you're not justifying, but nearly. You're kind of saying pedophilia isn't, if it's no worse than having sex with a 17-year-old girl. You're taking what is the most reprehensible behavior you can think of, sexual abuse of a non-mature, of a prepubescent child. I mean, this is immoral and insane at the same time. People who do this, this is different. There are levels. I know this is a hard idea for people to understand, but there are levels. One thing is worse than another. If I go steal something from the store, it's wrong. But if I go steal a widow's life savings, it's a little worse. Can you guys fucking grasp this concept?
When do men and women reach the age of sexual maturity? It ain't 18. It isn't 20. I've seen women say, a 20-year-old girl is a literal child. No, sorry, she's not even a figurative child, let alone a literal child. Do you know what canon law in the Catholic Church says? It says the minimum age to get married is 14 for women, 16 for men. That's the canon law of the Catholic Church. So you want to pull rank on me with morality? I would take you there. And by the way, that's how it was for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. Do you know when age of consent became a thing? Like 30 years ago. That is a second wave feminist artifact. But you people are not ready for that.
No, that's not really true. I mean, well, maybe it is. I mean, but you also have to understand the women's movement wasn't always bad. The early women's movement, there were the suffragettes. And yeah, giving the women the vote was insane. But feminism changed in the 60s along with everything else, and it all sort of followed the lead of the civil rights movement. But those early progressive feminist they weren't feminists yet. They were suffragettes or whatever else you called them. In the early part of the 20th century, they were concerned about women, the actual well-being of women. They had not yet adopted all this postmodern nonsense about, how the family's awful and all this. Now, and then people joked about them because there probably were a lot of old maids among the suffragettes. But they fought things like women in the workplace, right? And women were being put in, there weren't a lot of labor laws protecting people working in, those early factories and awful, brutal jobs in early factories. And there were a lot of women working those jobs and working long hours for low pay in factories. And that was one of their causes that, no, we need to take them out of there because they wanted to protect their role as mothers, potential mothers, heads of household, matriarchs of the household, and all that. So, age of consent laws, at least partially, were a positive advancement for women, that I can accept, anyway, it's more complicated than Nick lets on here. But his goal here is to blame it all on it's all feminism, or it's, which I think is wrong. I think he's wrong in that he's trying to suggest that, all this pedophilia talk is arising from a feminist impulse. I don't think so. Feminists are jumping on board, but you'll notice that, on the hardcore left, all the high-profile feminists aren't getting too worked up about Epstein,
Because ultimately, feminism is the matrix. And that is how women have browbeaten men with this, pedo, rapist, misogynist, all these words to prop up women's rights. That's ultimately what it's about. It's about women completing high school and going to college. That's what it is.
He has a point here. He probably sees more direct, like I said, more of a direct influence here in this specific case than is really warranted. But he's absolutely right. And you could blame capitalism. From one point of view, you could do a lot worse than to simply blame capitalism for driving women into the workforce. When you look at the history of like the second wave, like I said, that first wave of what would later be called feminism was taking women out of the workplace. It was really working against, the capitalist impulse, which is to get the cheapest labor wherever it comes from, right? That early wave of feminism, would have welcomed the post-World War II return of women to the home, The second wave of feminism was largely a reaction to that. Women got to go work in factories, and there was a much better situation in the mid-century, especially during war when they couldn't, you know, they had to pay them a little bit. It was much better than the early 20th century, late 19th century, you know. And all these women had to go back home and be homemakers again, and a lot of them resented it. And that was a big impetus for feminism that would reach its fruition in the 60s. Uh, but you can see it happening, and it's even, you know, occasionally celebrated still. That what that did by devaluing devaluing motherhood, the home, children, raising up above these things uh, the personal liberty of women, the individual rights of women, and thereby their economic interests as individuals, right? It was all, and again, it doesn't matter if it's directed by, you know, that's the purpose behind it. There's a cabal who had this specific purpose in mind. Doesn't really matter, though I think that's kind of this what's happening. The whole thing, though, that was happening is you see these two things happening is this was about moving women into the workplace to go from where we were before the 60s when it was mostly a guy goes to work, he can raise a family, he can afford 3 or 4 kids and support his wife and have a little house and a car, uh, to where we are now, where it's like any household has to have 2 earners to have 1 kid, right? So the whole feminist movement can be seen as capitalism drawing that that labor, you know, out of the house, right? There it's laying to them, it's laying fallow out there, right? It's underutilized, right? There are all these jobs that we could just be doing, paying women half as much to do, right? And the difference, the arbitrage difference, we pocket, right? And that's what happened. And now we're in this fucking hell because of that. But talk to me about communism, guys.
The only reason, and let me tell you this, I'm not in favor of like everybody go have sex with 14-year-olds. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the only reason that people are so horrified when people talk about like 16 and 17 not really being immoral, it's because we have a culture of casual sex and pornography and hookups and prostitution. That's why. Why is it considered completely depraved at age 17 and a half versus 18? Because we hate the idea of young,
All right. Something weird is happening. Can you hear me? Let me just check. Something weird is happening. Yeah. Oh, I was just on the greatest rant, too. You missed the best part. It always happens that way. Let's see if I can still play this. I think maybe they're not maybe. Let me check my email. I don't think they're going to let me play any more Nick. I don't see anything. I'm having trouble starting this back up. Here we go.
If you are grooming a child into sex.
Now, you heard what Nick just said, and I was just talking about how I think he's absolutely right, is that people are overcompensating for what most people, even, so-called conservatives, the kind of people who cite the lack of women's rights in Iran to justify shit. Because they see this Sodom and Gomorrah that we've made of our world. Can you hear me, Phil? Thank you. They feel the need to overcompensate by denouncing the sex with underage girls. And I'm not saying I approve of that. I think it was an advancement to create some standard, with 18. When you think yeah, it's very arbitrary, 18 years old. But you had to do something. I think it is an advancement. It is better if girls marry, at 18 rather than 14. Of course, the problem we have is they're not marrying at all. They're just going out and getting run through. And that's the problem. People, they think, okay, first off, what they think is we need to establish a boundary between this degenerate playground that we've established with so-called adult, the adult sexual environment, but we can't let the kids in there. That's the thing. You 18 years old, you get to cross the gate into Sodom, and that's how it works, and that's how it will be made to work, they think. But there's beyond that, there's also if they think for 5 minutes more about it, they realize that we cannot create this Sodom and Gomorrah that we've created without inevitably 14-year-old girls being seduced into it, being drawn into prostitution, being drawn into promiscuous sex, right? It's obviously happening. So they think, again, with this arrogance of the individual focus, right? The arrogance of individuality as a way of life, it's important for them to distinguish themselves as being against underage girls being, sexually abused or sexually active even. Right? So they need to call it pedophilia if that's, they need to call you evil if you call them out in the way I'm calling them out here,
If you're or I should say a teenager, if you're grooming a teenager into sex, if you're grooming a teenager into prostitution, pornography, that is especially wicked because teenage girls are vulnerable. Teenage girls argue.
It's funny, this is what I been saying for a long time. It's like Nick knows what I'm thinking.
Cannot make those decisions. But that is only because we live in a society where that kind of predation is happening.
Yes.
And that's where it starts to make sense. When women say a 19-year-old is a child. Well, no, a 19-year-old isn't a child. However, a 19-year-old teenage girl might be just as susceptible to grooming as a 17-year-old.
Yeah.
That's why it seems arbitrary. A 19-year-old teenage girl, an 18-year-old teenage girl.
Yeah, and you have to think about the difference between what is considered now, and most of these people will consider where we are now as being better than where we were in the past, when a 15-year-old girl, far more commonly, a 15-year-old girl might marry and end up having kids when, when she's still very young. And to many modern people, that seems barbaric. But of course, that world where that happened, where what was happening, that's occasionally younger women generally, and occasionally very young women as young as 14 or 15, were marrying, joining the married world, right? And eventually becoming mothers. What we have now, and it was allowed for the most part, right? What we have now is that we have these strict laws, or we think we have these strictly enforced laws against 18-year-old underage girls entering into this bacchanal that we've created, this sexual environment. But of course, what we have is hypocrisy. We just have a whole system of hypocrisy where we say, yeah, everybody gets to do whatever the fuck they want, but no one under 18, right? And it goes on anyway, and everybody knows it's going on anyway. But they all get to pretend. And they get to talk about pedophilia, and they get to dumb down. There are all these secondary effects, like the dumbing down of the discourse.
Girl might be just as susceptible to manipulation and grooming as a 17 or 16-year-old girl by a man who only wants sex from her without marrying her, by a man that wants to pimp her out, that wants, whatever, all these things that are happening in our society. So what are we really talking about? What we're talking about is women being taken advantage of. And we're saying that.
Again, Phil, you said, I know they were against prohibition. They led prohibition and all, assuming the feminists, but it seemed to gather steam post-45. There were two different movements. They're barely related. In fact, when the 60s rolled around, there were still some old gals from the early movement, right? They were young in the early part of the century. Now they were older. They were actually opposed to the new brand of feminism. They don't have a real relationship. And what's the difference, really? I mean, you could say the difference is the Jewish influence, really. The difference is, the same difference between every movement in the 60s to what came before. Progressivism, it would be incredibly inaccurate and naive to connect what we call progressivism now, to think of it as existing in a straight historical line as the original progressives of the late 19th century. Guys like, Prince Kropotkin, right? All these early so-called progressives, and keep in mind that, early 20th century, the progressive movement included people like Teddy Roosevelt. They're not even the same. There's a break in there. That's not very clear, but there is a break between what we now call feminism, and the early suffragettes. What we now call progressivism and the early progressives. Indeed, what we now call socialism and the first socialists,
It is especially heinous when a younger, more vulnerable girl is taken advantage of. Consent is not, I don't think that's really a real thing. I think that's like a feminist construct. And these like legal limits, I think that's very arbitrary. What we're talking about is younger girls that are sexually mature being taken advantage of. But take that up with a society that doesn't value marriage. Here's the difference. In the old days, girls would get married at 16. And I think far fewer people would object to that. Some people still might. Girls would get married at 15, 16, 17. but you recognize that that's different. If they're in a marriage where they're being provided for, they're going to have kids, they're going to become a mother, they're going to build a life with a man who's going to love them, that's different, actually, than the society we have today. And the only reason you need age of consent is because we have a society that's built on the pill. We have a society that's built on birth control. We have a society that's built on abortion, pornography increasingly, all these other things. And so now when we think of like sex and women, we think, oh my gosh, make the age of consent 21. Because why would we want an 18-year-old girl to have her 18th birthday and then get on OnlyFans? It's insane.
Yes.
Why would we want a girl to turn 18 and be able to become an escort or sleep with any?
Yeah, and it's insane. And many of the same people who are talking about pedophiles, 14-year-old girls, are like, oh yeah, but she's 18, then it's off to the races, 12:01 a.m. on her 18th birthday. Okay, all that is no longer a concern. No, he's absolutely right.
And every guy in college, it's gross. But that's only because we hate the idea of women being taken advantage of. But you know what? Women can be taken advantage of at any age because women are emotional, trusting, more so than men.
And of course, it's all based on this idea that women of any age should have the same rights and autonomy as males, and that they have the same, and that they're all equally endowed with good judgment once they reach the age of 18, right? It's all absurd and stupid.
Women are easier to manipulate, and younger women easier than more mature women. And that's really the issue. So don't take it up with, people love to say pedophilia. That's really the wrong lens. No, actually, that's not pedophilia. And I think that there is such a hysteria about that and obsession.
This is all wonderful. I actually agree with all this, but nobody's watching. So I'm going to take my ball and go home. Just a moment. I'm going to try to revive my screen. All right. Let me see if this works. Yeah, well, everything he said is great. I mean, that's just it. I mean, and this is why, if I had to take a side, I don't take a side. If I had to take a side in the Nick versus anti-Nick debates, I'm taking his side. Because, smart is better than stupid, and effective is better than shrieking, and people will take this. Lots of people, I'm sure, see this and are just horrified, and they just mischaracterize it, or just, say, oh, he's just justifying pedophilia, and it's just depressing, because everybody on the right seems to be an idiot at this point. We don't have talent. And I don't think Nick's going to take us much farther. He's great at this. But somebody was talking about Goebbels earlier. Nick is Goebbels. We need a Hitler. It's, I'm not saying that to indulge in this Hitler kitsch, because, I want to be sensible about Hitler and everything else too. That means I don't view him as history's monster, but I don't view him as history's hero either. I don't know enough. I'm suspending judgment on Hitler. That's my position on Hitler. I think that's radical enough. But yeah, he's Goebbels. He's a great communicator. He's excellent at this. But he doesn't want to lead, and that's evident. And when and one thing he does is he talks too much. He's on the air too much. So there's too many of these casual, improvised rants of his where he talks about personal stuff. And he comes off poorly, or he comes off nihilistic or narcissistic. Now, that might be true or not, I don't know, but it just suggests to me that he's not the guy. If there's going to be a leader, if that's possible, even in this environment, that a single man can be charismatic and effective enough to lead us, whoever us is and wherever we're going. That's not him. He's not here yet. But what I fear, my most pessimistic heart fears that change is not possible except through the political process. As meaningless as the presidency and voting, as meaningless as it is right now, there's nothing else that can take its place. And voting is only meaningless because powerful money behind it has made it has turned it into a skin suit, right? The power of money, which is now the power of Jews, wears democracy like a skin suit. But maybe our best chance is to reclaim the democratic process. Not liberal democracy, not the Constitution per se, but through the democratic process, elect somebody. And this would be very much like Hitler getting elected chancellor and then rescinding a lot of the rights. Rescinding, I don't know what they had. Did they have a constitution? But rescinding a lot of laws and establishing himself as a dictator. That might be the only way we can do this. And that's a long shot, but I don't see us doing it by talking on the internet. Podcasts aren't going to get you there. It's been a great start. It's a stage. It may prove historically to have been a necessity, an irreplaceable necessity for guys like Nick to have done this, what they've done. And they should be celebrated. But ultimately, there's something else has to happen, and we need to figure it out quick. We need to act quickly. It's not about saving America per se. It's not about saving the Constitution per se. But we might use those things to get there. Voting is meaningless. I'm sure Nick Fuentes has said this many times. Yeah, but it might be made meaningful by an insurrectionary act. We thought we were doing that with Trump. He let us down. Well, he was the best we had to work with. And we blew a lot of shit. We blew a lot of stuff up by electing that idiot. But I still don't regret it. Still don't. We're not in the wrong. To have elected that fucking crazy man, to put an end to this fucking not so slow ride into hell that was represented by Hillary Clinton. It's not our fault. We regret Donald Trump. I do, at least. I regret voting for him in 2016. I came to my senses by well before 2024, but ultimately, we should acknowledge Trump as, I don't know if he's a mistake. Like I said, he was the only thing they gave us. He's the only thing we had at hand. So we tried it because it was better than to accept this hideous world they're creating for us. But we should regret Trump. We should acknowledge that he's a disaster. But blame ultimately goes on the system and those who run it for having presented us with this choice. That's really what Trump 2016 was all about, right? Oh, you don't like Hillary Clinton. You don't like, continuing down this stupid road to slavery. You could blow everything up. Do you want to blow everything up? We said, yeah, we'll blow everything up. And of course, we didn't blow everything up. They tricked us maybe, right? Like I said, we should have known in 2016. We had all the signs early on. But even young Nick there didn't figure it out. So anyway, should we hear some more Nikki?
With that on the right. And I think, like everything else, it defines down what a heinous crime pedophilia really is and what a perversion it really is.
Yes.
And I'm not like raising a flag for child marriage or something, but I'm saying let's just get our history straight and let's start to understand sexual morality. Let's
just be adults, though. And the point he made that I haven't been hitting on, that I commend him for, is exactly what you said before, and that, it's not now people talking about 14-year-old girls marrying and joining a household and having children young. That's not what's happening. And these people who are talking about pedophilia, are just trying to front. Like, okay, for one thing, they're talking about something it's this futile endeavor to try and keep 14-year-old girls out of the libertine sexual environment we've created of sexual liberation, right? Oh yeah, it's not happening, right? And it's futile and it's not going to happen. Of course you can't just put up these fences here. 14-year-old girls are out there in numbers getting brought into this fucking hell, right? They're getting ruined before they hit 20, right? That's inevitable. You're either going to have strict sexual morality or not. You know what I mean? You're not going to have this false world that these people think they've created, where okay, you turn 18 and then it's no holds barred sexually. But before that, no, like that works, like that's even desirable, like that's gonna, and ultimately the whole idea is, the whole misconception is that, that it's just about the sex, it's just about the individual, right? The exploitation of an individual 14-year-old girl. But the real, more important reason, and this goes back to today's theme of individuality versus collectivism. I'm a collectivist. All these people have this misconception that sexual morality is about individual rights, the right of a 14-year-old girl not to be sexually abused, which I don't say doesn't exist, But the more important thing about having sexual morality and sexual rules is the health of the collective, the health of the people. It's so fucking obvious. People, wake up. Wake up. Stop speaking the language, the phony language of individual rights, and take up the cause of the collective. Stop talking about commies and stop talking about how we're saving Iranian gays from rooftops. Fuck. Grow the fuck up. Okay. All right. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, Sigel. You guys are awesome. The rest of you, go fuck your goddamn selves. You silent ass motherfuckers. Go fuck yourselves, and I don't doubt you'll do it in silence. Because apparently you're all mute. You're all mute as fuck. I kid. I'm joking, right? Anyway, it's getting, weather's nice. I'm going outside. You go outside. Reconnect with the world. Forget everything you've heard here. And remember, the best punk rock band ever happened to be from Japan.
Canaria no,